Hello, this is Court Watch with Alex Sawyer, and I'm excited to bring you the latest episode of my podcast where I am joined by John Bursch, Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. He will be arguing a case on April 2nd on behalf of the Director of South Carolina's Health and Human Services Department, which is looking to eliminate Medicaid dollars from being used at abortion clinics like Planned Parenthood. The case, Kerr versus Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, involves the state's move in 2018 to eliminate Medicaid dollars from going to Planned Parenthood. South Carolina tried to restrict a Medicaid beneficiary's ability to choose their provider if they offer abortion. But Planned Parenthood South Atlantic and a Medicaid patient challenged the state's move. The lower court sided against South Carolina, prompting the appeal to the justices. Thanks, John, for taking time to talk to me about your case. My first question is really, what exactly is at stake in this legal battle in regards to the ability of other states, like South Carolina, to be able to remove taxpayer dollars from going towards abortion providers?
There's a number of states, including South Carolina, that have tried to defund Planned Parenthood for a variety of reasons, everything from their filthy clinics to the medical malpractice they commit to the alleged sale of aborted fetal body parts and tissue, to just the gross number of abortions that they perform and the fact that they give so many gender transitioning drugs to kids. There's lots of reasons to disqualify Planned Parenthood. But across the country, federal courts have been prohibiting them from doing that as part of the Medicaid program. And so what's at stake is the state's ability to decide that Planned Parenthood is an activist organization that does not deserve taxpayer dollars when those monies could be much better spent at clinics that provide actual health care for women who are on Medicaid.
Right. And one of the things I've learned also about Planned Parenthood is I don't believe that they provide any sort of mammograms, correct? Is that accurate?
That's correct. For years, the rumor was that Planned Parenthood provided mammograms, but I think investigative reporting showed that to be unequivocally false. And if you go to the vast majority of Planned Parenthood clinics, like the ones in South Carolina, you'll find that they really don't provide much primary care at all. In this case, one of the plaintiffs, in addition to Planned Parenthood, is Julie Edwards. And as she reported in her complaint, she has a number of medical conditions, everything from type 1 diabetes to partial blindness to nerve damage. And when she went in, Planned Parenthood gave her an IUD and a recommendation to go see another provider about her high blood pressure. And that was all. And practically down the street, only 1.4 miles away, was another South Carolina Medicaid provider. And they would have provided the full panoply of services that she needed in network. So there's just a tremendous difference between Planned Parenthood and other clinics that provide comprehensive health care.
I know you said that there's been some issues with federal courts trying to block states from being able to take away tax dollars from abortion providers. So in particular, with the Fourth Circuit having ruled against South Carolina, what were the flaws in that decision that you think will be particularly of interest at the Supreme Court?
The big flaw is that the lawsuit never should have gotten out of the starting gate. There is nothing in the Medicaid Act that says that beneficiaries or even providers can bring federal court lawsuits in order to challenge a disqualification decision. Instead, the Act says or strongly suggests that the remedy can be set up by the state as an administrative appeal, which in South Carolina's case can then be appealed to the state courts and even to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. But instead of taking that administrative appeal and state court appeal route, which was fully authorized, Planned Parenthood recruited this beneficiary of Medicaid and brought a federal lawsuit instead. And not only does that put them in a different forum, but then it allows them to ask for attorney's fees at the end of the process. And so now states who simply want to defund an activist organization providing abortions and medications to kids to change their gender is being stuck in federal court and paying all kinds of dollars, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions in attorney's fees that should be spent on women in the Medicaid program. That's the fatal flaw in the Fourth Circuit's reasoning.
So let me ask you, is this a case of first impression, or has there been a state that has, I guess, successfully in some way been able to eliminate or remove tax dollars from going to places like Planned Parenthood?
There are many states that have attempted this, and so far 7 federal courts of appeals have ruled. 5 of them ruled for Planned Parenthood, 2 of them ruled for the state. The most recent one was the en banc Fifth Circuit, which ruled in favor of Texas and held up their exclusion of Planned Parenthood as part of their state Medicaid program. So if the United States Supreme Court agrees with South Carolina in this case, and we think that they should, the United States has come on our side to support that, then that would allow all those states that want to defund Planned Parenthood because of their sordid medical practices, how they use so much of the funding that they receive for political advocacy instead of medical care, they'll be free to do that.
One question I had for you was if this case is about abortion or if it's about a state's rights. I know there's obviously talk about the ability to move tax dollars away or towards what a state would prefer, what state lawmakers would prefer. But I know in the news, everyone kind of focuses on abortion. So I wanted to give you a chance and kind of ask, is it about one or the other or both?
It is about both. Fundamentally, it is a states' rights question because there are more than 9,000 providers of all different kinds across the United States who have been disqualified by their states and not allowed to participate in the Medicaid program. And if Planned Parenthood prevails, then every single one of those disqualified doctors and hospitals and clinics could simply find a former patient and go into federal court and demand that they be reinstated to Medicaid. But it's also about abortion because these cases tend to come up the most often when it comes to Planned Parenthood. The states are documenting all the cases of malpractice, the confidential settlement agreements that Planned Parenthood enters into, the prevalence with which they're giving these gender-changing drugs, as well as the abortions they perform, the dramatic decreases in primary care that they provide. I mean, many people don't know that annual visits to Planned Parenthood by patients has decreased 60% since the 1990s. So they're increasingly doing more of the things the public opposes and less true healthcare. So as a result, all those lawsuits, the 5-2 circuit split, have involved Planned Parenthood. So it's going to ultimately be a question of both.
My other aspect of this is, so if the Supreme Court were to rule for you for South Carolina, do you anticipate other states then to go and look, I guess, at the 2018 law that South Carolina had passed? Do you expect them to follow suit? Kind of like what we saw with Dobbs. Once Roe v. Wade was struck down, you saw other states looking to Mississippi and going in and passing similar legislation like that. Do you think that that's something that could happen here?
Oh, absolutely, because there are so many states that have already tried to disqualify Planned Parenthood as a Medicaid provider and then been told by a federal court that they're not allowed to do that. As I mentioned, 5 federal courts of appeals have stopped states from trying to do that very thing. So I would expect that all those states and maybe more would then come back. And it might be a law like South Carolina's, which simply says, we don't think that public funds, taxpayer dollars, should be going to an abortion provider when we are a pro-life state. You know, every dollar that we send them is fungible. So maybe they don't use it on an abortion procedure, but they can use it for overhead and to pay their doctor's salaries and things like that. And that frees up more money for them to then be able to perform abortions. But it could also be for all these other things we've been talking about. It could be for the gender changing drugs that they're giving our young people, including minors and without their parents' consent. It could be because of these lawsuits showing the deplorable conditions and the medical malpractice that's being committed. It could be the aborted fetal body parts and tissue transfers and sales that the media have documented. It could just be that Planned Parenthood gets hundreds of millions of dollars, and much of it is diverted towards promoting abortion and transgender changing advocacy. In South Carolina, for example,
rather than medical care, right?
They passed a law in South Carolina to protect children from puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. And Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, the plaintiff in this case, oppose that politically. Well, where do you think those dollars come from? They come from states like South Carolina. So South Carolina is giving money to an activist organization to lobby against policies that the people of South Carolina want to protect children. So for all those reasons, people might support a bill like that.
So what you just hit on might be the answer to my next question, but my last question I always ask is, what do you think about this case has gone unreported, or that you think I should have asked you that I didn't ask? Something that you see out there or a misconception that you want to address?
Well, the public, in large part, thinks that Planned Parenthood is a dependable healthcare provider. And that's really not the case. Planned Parenthood brags about the fact that it's often the nation's leading abortion provider year over year. They're now bragging that they are the second greatest provider of these gender transitioning drugs for our young people. And people don't know that. They also don't know that Planned Parenthood isn't providing mammograms. They're not providing prenatal care. The percentage of cases where they refer a pregnant woman out for an adoption have fallen dramatically over the years. So the Planned Parenthood of today is very different than the one that people remember from 30 years ago. And so I encourage them to read the New York Times article that came out just last month about all the abuse and the misdirection of funds and the malpractice that's taking place at Planned Parenthood, and just get educated about these issues. Because if we want to support women who are in low income and difficult situations, there's a really good way to do that. And that's to direct Medicaid dollars to providers that will give real health care.
Yeah, I think the mammogram aspect is something I always hear. Everybody's always shocked about, like, wait, they don't provide mammograms, since that's something that you hear is one of the biggest threats to women, especially young women these days with breast cancer on the rise. But I wanted to say thank you so much for taking time to chat about your case with me. Do we expect this one to come out in at the end of June? Is that kind of the timeline that we anticipate?
We do. I'll be arguing the case on April 2nd. And so typically a case argued that late in the year will come out at the end of June, but before July 1st. So keep your eyes open for that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
To read more about this case, you can go to WashingtonTimes.com. And also feel free to email me interesting questions or topics that you want explored about the legal reporting world. My email is aswoyer@WashingtonTimes.com.